Well, let me say good afternoon, good morning, depending on what time of day people watch this. I want to welcome you to what we call Preacher Conversations. And this is a special segment, Women of the Word. And I am very honored to have Dr. Arerial Ellis as our guest today. Good afternoon, Dr. Ellis.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Well, good. You're in Durham right now, or are you traveling?
I am I am home in Cary, North Carolina, which is right outside of Durham.
Okay, all right. Well, how's the weather there? Here in Virginia, we've got sunshine. It is not a typical February day, and I am not complaining. Okay.
Yes, sir. Same here. There's some sunshine and so a little bit of warmth, and so we needed it. As you know, recently relocated from Nashville, and I believe we got more sun in Nashville than we do in North Carolina. So really,
Okay.
really grateful that God sent us some sunshine today.
Well, I'm glad that you're in this area, the southeast part of the country, and I know Nashville misses you. You were active and involved and made Tennessee a better place. But we're glad that you're on this part of the country. Okay. All right. Well, let's get started.
Thank you for having me.
I always ask first off the bat, tell us about yourself. Who are you? How would you describe Arerial Ellis? I know you. People in
Mhm.
Churches of Christ know you, and now you're in the Durham area, Cary. But you just tell us in your own words who Arerial Ellis is.
Wow. I don't even know where to start. There's a lot, and I'm sure everyone probably says it about themselves. But first off, I'm a servant. I'm a humble servant. I'm a grateful heart. I am. I like to call myself a feminine alpha instead of an alpha female. Feminine alpha. I am a communicator. I'm a cultural architect. Um, I'm also an HBCU grad and a Southern girl, and I have this thing that I call a big beautiful life, and where I've seen God's hand just kind of operate over my life from the very beginning, from the moment I arrived on this earth. So for context, because I'm sure that sounds very poetic, but for context, I'm a Memphis native, born and raised, and grew up in Memphis in the Whitehaven area. All black everything, black neighborhood, black church, black family, black schools, and that was such a beautiful experience to see blackness and its richness and it being an asset in growing up in Memphis. And in growing up in Memphis, there was a lot of experience specifically with my family around not only prioritizing faith in God, but also our heritage as African Americans. But particularly as it relates to faith in God, I look back on my upbringing and I kind of compare it to what children may be experiencing now and what parenting is like now. And I remember sitting at the feet of my grandparents and the elders in my family and the uncles and hearing them talk about the Bible. And I'm also an only child. So I was usually a part of, not necessarily a part of, I was usually exposed to grown folks' conversation.
Okay.
And that helped me a lot though, because it taught me how to articulate myself, how to take difficult concepts and make them simple. It taught me how to listen and observe and be able to compare and contrast different perspectives. So I use that to say that now, as an entrepreneur, having been in business for almost 19 years, as an educator, as a professor, having taught at Lipscomb University, Church of Christ University for 10 years, and now at HBCU, North Carolina Central. And even in the coaching that I do, the writing that I do as an author, the speaking that I do on the corporate side and in the church, it's really shaped and formed me. So I could go on and on, but I think that's a good summary.
Well, that's a good start. That's a real good start. And you're wearing a lot of hats. You said you're a HBCU graduate. Which school did you graduate from?
Big Blue, Tennessee State University, the Grammy Award winning Tennessee State University.
Is that right? Okay, all right. So you didn't go very far from Memphis. You were only about 2.5 hours away, right, from home. Okay, and
That's
where are you teaching now? You're teaching at a HBCU university, and tell us a little bit
yeah.
about that and your journey there. Okay.
Yeah, so thank you. So the journey there was interesting. I started my career right out of college as I graduated from Tennessee State. I was a journalism major. I wanted to follow in the footsteps of Oprah, not directly. I didn't necessarily want to be a talk show host, but I wanted to build an empire, if you will, in the media entertainment world. And so my mother went to Tennessee State and my dad went to Clark, Atlanta. And so that HBCU, energy was always around. I think even I had aunts, my great grandfather's sisters, if I'm not mistaken, they either went to Lane College in Jackson or Russ College in Mississippi. But anyway, the HBCU narrative was always a part of my upbringing. I used to look at my mother's yearbook from Tennessee State when I was a kid and just make up these stories about what life was like back then. And then by the 90s, A Different World, the TV show came out. So I was definitely influenced by that. But also mainly it was Oprah for the most part. And so I decided to pursue Tennessee State University. And when I graduated, I started my first business right out of college. I started a PR firm and started to work in the sports and entertainment space as a publicist. And worked in that space and started my own business. Didn't quite know what I was doing, but people trusted me and they would do the services and they would give me money and it worked. And I made a living for myself. And I didn't have to have a job. That was my job, running my own business at 22 and working with athletes and rappers and all kinds of stuff, going to the Grammys and the Super Bowl and all these things. But I started to realize that that didn't have enough substance for me, or at that stage of my life, I knew it was good and it was fun and I was doing well financially, but I knew that there was more that God had for me. And so I was exposed to what it was like to be in the classroom, because I went back to Tennessee State to take on a role of managing the school's radio station. The school had an AM radio station and they wanted someone full-time who had been an alumni of the program to manage the radio station as a professor, took another role at another school. So I didn't have the qualifications to teach, but I got a chance to, while I'm building my business, I got a chance to also work on the backside with faculty, the same faculty that taught me, right? So I was able to, after a year or so of graduating, they asked me to come back as an employee. And that's where I got a chance to see what it was like to be a professor. And I always wanted a master's degree. So I thought, let me get the master's degree and then go from there. So I ran my business for several years, hoping that someone would offer me a teaching position. And it didn't happen. It looked like it wasn't going to happen at all. And then Lipscomb University called after about maybe 4 or 5 years after I got my master's degree and kind of got settled into my career. Lipscomb University called and they said, we need somebody to revamp our PR program, someone who's a practitioner in the field. And oh, by the way, full-time faculty have to be members of the Church of Christ. And it worked out. They offered me the job. I was actually getting ready to move to LA because things had kind of calmed down with the recession, and my business was back booming again. And I was like, I think I'm done with Nashville for now. And some of my clients were out in LA, and I thought that's where I needed to be, and literally um, was going out there on a regular basis, and got on the plane to get back to Nashville after a very sketchy trip where God started to kind of show me signs. LA is not where you need to be at this stage of your life. I'm going to bring you back to LA, but it's not going to be this. And literally on the plane back to Nashville with that feeling in my spirit, I checked my email before the plane took off, and I had an offer in my email from Lipscomb University.
Isn't
So
that
I
something?
taught, yes, yes, sir. So I taught there for 10 years, and also got my doctorate while I was there, continued to run my business, which ended at that point. I had a second business. I had merged my first one with a colleague. So I had a second business at the time, wrote a book and a bunch of other things for those 10 years. And so those 10 years were good, but they were difficult with some of the challenges that exist being in a predominantly white environment. And so I had to think through, what do I really want for my life, and where can I take what God has allowed me to experience? What can I use? What can I do with what God has allowed me to experience here and take it elsewhere? And so I started to be very intentional in praying about what my life could and should look like, and where my talents and gifts would be best served. And I just felt I felt a calling to go back to an HBCU. I'd never taught in an HBCU, but I had been a student at one, and I had worked at one as a employee for about 3 years. So I knew that's where I wanted to be. And I literally was looking for maybe other opportunities to relocate. Maybe I was looking at Houston
Yeah,
and Prairie View and Texas Southern and having
yeah,
conversations with them.
yeah,
And God shut those doors completely. He shut those doors and then opened one in North Carolina.
yeah.
And when that door opened,
Tell us
it
where
just
you're teaching at. I think people
so
will be, yeah.
yes. So I am at North Carolina Central University in Durham, North Carolina. I was familiar with some of the schools, some of the HBCUs in North Carolina, but I wasn't exactly familiar with North Carolina Central. So I am now the endowed chair, distinguished professor at North Carolina Central University in Durham. Been there or here for a year now, and it's been great. I'm specifically in the Department of Mass Communication, which is my discipline, of course, and teaching public relations. But we get to, as in my position as an endowed chair, I get to do some fun things. I get to bring in guest lecturers from the industry. Like next week, we're bringing Benny Pugh, who was the former president of Rock Nation Music. Got a chance to work with Rihanna and Jay-Z, and students love stuff like that. I took some students to Dallas to a huge PR conference where was on the board of that organization, president of their foundation, and took those students to Dallas. We're preparing now to take a group of students to Ghana.
Yeah.
My mentor, who recommended me for the position in North Carolina Central, was recently named president of Dillard University, another fine HBCU in North Carolina. So I just, God's hand has been all over everything I've ever either tried to do, attempted to do. I just see his hand over that process. And so I put it in my heart. I wanted to be in an HBCU, and he sent me to one.
Well, that's so interesting. And you have a lot of accomplishments at such a young age. And I don't say that in a critical way. I say that in a positive way. And you went after things. You mentioned earlier that you're a female alpha. What does that mean, a female alpha and everything? What
I
do you
say,
mean?
I say feminine alpha. Um,
Feminine. Okay.
oh, I don't.
Feminine.
Dr. Crusoe, brother Crusoe. Yes, I think let's unpack that. Let's unpack that. All right.
Yeah.
So, of course, that's a kind of a play on a phrase, alpha female. That it can go two ways, but this is really the crux of it. Of course, specifically, I'm a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, so there's no need to put feminine in front of that, right? But culturally, the term alpha female or even alpha male, right? When we use the word alpha, we're specifically sometimes, tagging dominance, power, words like that are affiliated with a leader. And so I do identify with that some degree. But I also know culturally that the phrase alpha female many times does not encompass or the balance of what it means to be a Black female. That many times the term alpha female really benefits those who may identify as white for the most part, because they get a
Yeah.
chance to move in spaces culturally where there's not as much discrimination, not as much bias, not as many microaggressions, not as many, or less of the opportunities for them to feel othered in a way. So I
Yeah.
like to say that I'm a feminine alpha, which essentially is I do not necessarily carry myself as a strong, independent woman that people want to attach to women of African descent. I do not necessarily affiliate myself with the context of dominance or being overpowering or being extremely dominant in a space. I
Yeah.
believe that there's a balance.
Yeah.
I believe that femininity is something that God wants women to embrace because he gave it to us. I believe there's a balance in being able to, yes, I believe that there's a balance in being able to put masculinity and femininity in the same space and allow it to thrive and grow in the way that he envisioned. But I do believe that there is still a place for leadership and power and things of that nature when it comes to a woman, but there's also balance in that. So that's why I call myself a feminine alpha for the
Well,
most
most
part. And that was
Yeah.
that.
Well, thank you. I knew this was going to be a very interesting and conversation. I was looking forward to it. You can just let loose. You said, Brother Crusoe, sir. We know each other, but this is going to be real good. Earlier, you mentioned about the events and the people that you bring in, and you mentioned several names. Rihanna stood out, and then some other people. What's all involved in that? Do you make the personal contact, or do you have someone, your people gets in touch with their people, that kind of thing? How does that actually work?
Your people call my people. No, it's not. Not exactly. So I mentioned next week at North Carolina Central, we have the former president of Rock Nation Music, Benny Pugh, coming to speak to our students. And he's worked with like the Jay-Z and Rihanna and Kanye West. And again, students need those experiences. But how does it work? So it can work a number of ways. I think that from my view in the role that I sit and the role that I play as a thought leader for the university and even in working with my clients. For instance, one of my clients, I run a diversity, equity, inclusion consulting company. And so we help organizations with their strategic planning, their communication strategy, their education and training, as well as coaching in the spaces related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And one of our clients is a national sports company, and we envisioned or created a virtual DEI summit for this organization, and we thought who would be a great host for the summit, right? This virtual event. We're still kind of at that point. We're still coming off of COVID and in the middle of COVID, actually. Who would be a great host for this summit? And I said, somebody from ESPN would be great. And at the time, we thought, let's bring in Maria Taylor, who was at ESPN at the time. So being in the world of communication and PR and media and journalism, you know how to navigate it. You have certain contacts. You can send an email or send a phone call. You have friends that you can reach out to. You have colleagues that you can reach out to and say, hey, our students really need to access someone like this. Can you bring somebody? Can somebody from Revolt? Can somebody, the TV and the podcast and the radio, or not even so much radio, but the podcast and the stations and the Instagram influencers that they're following, how can we get them in front of the students, not just them watching them on their phones or their laptops? How can we get them to campus? So we're having conversations around, what celebrities will be open to come into the classroom, not just coming to speak and coming to do an event or coming to do a concert or what athletes can we get access to. So I think it's a natural approach and it's a natural thing when you work in that space. Sometimes the folks will come for free. Sometimes you have to have a budget and you have to pay them. But it just really depends on how you structure those things, who you call, who's interested.
Yeah.
The people have to be interested. We've thought about
Yeah.
what does it mean to bring certain people, like the CEO of Ebony Magazine, or somebody like a Nick Cannon who sat on the board of Nickelodeon, and for just various reasons, to give them those uh, one-on-one, up close, personal experiences, so that they know you're not just coming to class and getting a grade. That
Right.
we want to create opportunities for you to reach and touch and talk to and ask questions to the people that you see on social media and you see on the TV and you hear, their music or whatever. So that's what I focus on doing for my students.
That's good. Yeah. And I want to circle back to that a little later. North Carolina Central, I had a roommate back in the 80s, early 80s. We were in law school together, and he's from North Carolina. He actually graduated from North Carolina Central, and he had a whole lot of good things to say. And I'll always remember him because he wasn't a Christian when we met and
Uh-huh.
started rooming together, but we started going to church together. He started going with me. He obeyed the gospel, came back to North Carolina, converted his mother and sister. So I'll
Mhm.
always remember North Carolina Central and Morganton, North Carolina for that. And that kind of
Wow.
segues into my next question. Describe your conversion experience or your come to Jesus experience. I know your mom,
Mhm.
and you and I have worked together on other platforms, ministry related platforms. But what was your conversion like, or your come to Jesus experience like?
Wow. I love that question. So my family comes from the CME tradition, and I would say maybe some AME Baptist as well. My grandmother was a member of the Church of God in Christ. So that was my early childhood. That's how I was formed, right? By those experiences and being in those faith communities, or being in those just church experiences, worship experiences. And then it was very much, it was very potent and powerful. Like, it was very much a real thing. And wasn't just, we weren't just a church going family. Like, we were religious people, people of faith, and living it every day. And so that's the kind of life that I saw growing up. And so, but when I was a small child, very small child, maybe my earliest memory of the Church of Christ was maybe about 5 or 6 years old. And all the years of tradition, all the way going back to my great great grandparents, of being in kind of connected and being brought through the CME church and other traditions. My uncle, it was my uncle who got married, and he married a woman who was a member of the Church of Christ. And by the time, of course, they got married long before I was born, but by the time I, realized that who God was, and that there is a God, and I could sing Jesus loves me and all the things, now lay me down to sleep and say those kind of prayers, right? Um, I realized that there were different churches, or there did different experiences, of course, but there was one God. And my uncle became a member of the Lord's church, and he would come to kind of family dinners on Sunday, and all the family gatherings, and he would come with his, like, ready to teach. He would come with tracks, he would come with film strips, he would come with all kinds of things. And I just remember, and as I said earlier, those discussions, those adult discussions that were being had, as that I witnessed during my childhood, a lot of it was that. A lot of it was, you know, uh exegesis and like all that kind of stuff, like these big conversations. So I couldn't escape it. I couldn't. And then two, I have a musical family. Everybody sings.
Okay.
So we
Mhm.
listen for to everything from Mahalia Jackson to the Blind Boys Alabama and the Winans and Mississippi Mass Choir, and we watched church on TV. We watched uh oh God, Bishop Patterson, and we watched all of that kind of stuff. But ultimately, as I became to make my own decision about choosing Christ as my personal savior, it was after seeing all of that, but it was seeing my great grandparents who were in their 70s and 80s get baptized.
Okay. Mhm.
So all of the things, all of the tradition, going to the Kojic church with my grandmother and going to all these conferences with like all of that, it was still like seeing my great grandparents get baptized, going to Sunday school at McKellar Avenue Church of Christ, like being
Yeah.
at every worship service and just being exposed to all of that. Ultimately, I remember telling my mom, I'm going to get baptized before my 13th birthday. And that
Mhm.
week before at 12, we got baptized. So I think it was just a series, Brother Crusoe, a series of events, a
Yeah.
series of experiences, watching, you know, watching these biblical debates happen at the dinner table.
Yeah.
But then going to the Kojic church with my grandmother, and then going to, these events that other family members would have at CME and the AME and the Baptist church, and then having real conversations with the people at my church at McKellar Avenue, where my family members just one by one started to get baptized. And so
Right.
eventually I said, okay, I think, I think it's my turn. I
Yeah.
think it's my turn. And
Okay.
that's how it happened for me.
Yeah. Well, that's great. That's a great story. And when you mentioned Bishop Patterson, if you lived in Memphis, you had to hear Bishop Patterson, and he was a great preacher, Nokomis Yeldale in Churches of Christ, of course, and that kind of thing. So I didn't know that you got
Mhm.
baptized at McKellar. At McKellar, that's where you were
I did. I
baptized?
got baptized at McKellar Avenue at 12. And you mentioned Brother Nicole Shieldell. It's funny, my grandmother, I did not know this until years later. My grandmother, who became a member of the Church of God in Christ, who literally would drag me to all the events with her and stuff like that, vacation Bible school, all that other stuff. She was the first person in our family to say, I'm going to leave the CME and go to the Church of Christ. Because she
Yeah.
used to
Yeah.
watch back to the 50s, maybe it was 50s, if I'm not
Mm.
mistaken. I believe Brother Nakoma Shieldale was the only Church of Christ minister who had a television broadcast.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I know Brother Yeldale was really effective with his radio program first,
Yeah, that's what it
and
was. It was a radio
yeah,
program.
the radio program, and many people just heard him on radio and were
Mhm,
baptized,
mhm.
and some of them are still alive, and they still remember hearing Brother Yeldale on radio, and so that's how the Advance Avenue Church and grew and then became the North Road Church. I'm trying to think of
Mhm.
the who was the preacher McKellar at that time, brother. Oh, I can't.
Charlie
I can see
Shedd.
Brother Shed. Yeah, I can see his face. Couldn't think of his name. Brother Shed. Well, let me ask this.
Mhm.
I know faith is important to you. You taught at Lipscomb University. How does your faith affect your work outside of church and outside of a Christian school? If that makes any
Mhm.
sense. How do you balance your faith? Well, balance probably wouldn't be the right word. How does your faith play a role in all the other things that you do? Because you wear a lot of hats and you wear them
Mhm.
well. But
Thank
how
you.
does faith uh, interact or connect with everything else that you're doing?
It is very interconnected. It's not a second thought. It's a it's it anchors. Everything I do is anchored in that, whether I'm doing business with clients or interacting with clients. Um, Interacting with students. Now that I'm at a HBCU, so for instance, at Lipscomb, it was required almost that you where you live out your faith as you interact with students and things of that nature. But just because I change jobs doesn't mean I change, my approach to how I live my life and how I integrate God in what I do. So I find myself a lot of times, even with my students at North Carolina Central, really encouraging them and it mentoring and coaching them in ways that are faith based, if you will, or influenced by my faith. I also think that, when you are a person of faith, when you're a believer, you you approach everything in that way. I do business. There are people who do business with integrity who are not believers, but I also have those of us who are believers are also doing business with integrity and character and all those things, but we also have the favor of God over us, right? We have the
Mhm.
favor of God over our business
Mhm.
and our careers and our books or whatever we do. So I don't do it differently at this stage of my life or at this stage of my career. I just do it more intentionally, I think. And I
Mhm.
do it not even so much more intentionally. It's a natural part of who I am. And so if you where I could be stern, I show
Mhm.
grace.
Mhm.
Where I could
Good.
be spiteful, I back off and let it go. Where I could be you know, where I could be a little more strict
Mhm.
on things, um, I have mercy and forgiveness. So I think that plays into, especially as an entrepreneur,
Yeah. Yeah.
you have to really, really, really think about how you want to navigate your career, how you navigate the marketplace, and how you do it with. And I'm seeing so many more than I've ever seen before. I'm seeing so many more like Facebook groups and coaching groups and conferences for the Christian entrepreneur and the Christian professionals and things of that nature, young professionals, and how to navigate this world and be in it and not of it, and how to bring ministry to the marketplace and bring the marketplace ministry and things of that
Yeah.
nature. So it's a part of me, and there's no way that it couldn't be.
Well, let me ask this. You're in the millennial generation. Are you a millennial or
I
okay?
am.
Yeah, yeah. And sometimes the millennials um, get a bad rap, and then sometimes they try to paint the picture that millennials question everything, and it's
Mhm.
refreshing when I hear a millennial speak of their faith, and it's refreshing when I hear a millennial who um, takes church seriously. But and I know you're not the spokesman for millennials, but what are some critical questions do you think or you've heard millennials ask about faith and church or Bible?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
this is just something that's coming up from our conversation. What's the
Sure,
most pressing issues or questions that millennials seem to have today?
sure, sure. In 2015, I released my first book, The Original Millennial: Lessons in Leadership for the Millennial Generation. And I did significant research on what does it mean for a millennial to lead, acknowledging that by 2025, which is right around the corner, 75% of leaders in the marketplace will come from the millennial generation. And that generation being the biggest to date or the largest to date, exceeding the number of baby boomers. What is it? We're in the middle of a cultural shift, or we've been in the midst of a cultural shift. And now there's a lot of talk about millennials, but there's much more talk now about Generation Alpha, the generation behind Generation Z and Generation Alpha, the two generations that are behind the millennials. So, so I think in writing the book, and I'm prayerful right now about a re-release of the book with some updated content at a second edition. But in doing releasing that book in 2015, I did a significant amount of research around what does it mean to be of that generation and all have all the cultural influences that we have, and how will those cultural influences help us to be most effective in this world. And so some of the research that I did was focused on faith. Actually, there's a chapter in the book focused on faith and things of that nature. And I think some of the questions that come from our generation are really a couple of things. I think one is that we question tradition in a healthy way, I believe. Other generations may not believe we question it in a healthy way, but I believe we question it in a healthy way to be able to better articulate what is needed for the times, what is biblical and what is doctrinal. Yes, that's the right word. What is biblical and what is preference? What is biblical? What is tradition? Right. And I believe our generation has agitated that a little bit. No, not a little bit, a lot of bit. I believe our generation has agitated that and caused our congregations to really have some real conversations around what works, what will work now, what will work for the future, and is there anything that we're practicing that does not work anymore for the cause of, right, for putting things forward, for the cause of Christ, for the way that we run programs and ministry and congregations and things of that nature. What works, right? What is absolutely fundamental that we should not change, but also what are we loyal to that no longer works? And I think church, contextually, I'm not saying the church, but I think the way we as a society do church, it's a dinosaur. It's a dinosaur.
Yeah.
And I've never seen a dinosaur, right? Like none of us have. So I think our generation has brought some healthy dialogue in for us to rethink church, if you will, and to have some real conversations around what is going to take us into the future. I also think our generation has challenged. We're the first generation, of course, Gen Xers, the generation prior to us, really were kind of the generation that said, I don't know if I really want to do church anymore. Or I'll do church because mama and daddy did church. Or if I do church, I'm gonna like be loyal and do all the things in church. So Generation X got really splintered. And you know this, you've done significant research in this area as well. But I think once we got to our generation, we had Google and we got phones and we got YouTube, we got all these other things that can that if we do not have a filter, if we're not trained spiritually to have a filter, then we can question anything and look up everything and believe everything and consume everything. And so I think that's a factor too for our generation. And I think the last thing that is really important, or the last thing I'll add that's really significant for our generation as well, is the context of leadership. And as I said earlier, statistics had, it was projected that in the next 2 years, 2025, 75% of leaders in the workplace would be millennials. That meant that the workplace needed to shift infrastructure and culture so that a generation of people who were not trained to wait until they were 40 to have a vice president position would not have to wait, right? Who had technology at their fingertips, who were accelerated in how they learned and the experiences that they had. So they're not going to go into an organization and wait for somebody to die for them to get a promotion. The same thing is very parallel to church. If there's not a place for me, why do I go? I don't have to go to church. I'm going to go to brunch on Sundays. So if there's no place for me to work, if there's no place for me, I can't serve on that ministry. There's no place for me to be trained and mentored on how to serve in ministry. There's no place for me to bring my ideas to ministry, right? that's one of the things also that turns, I believe, millennials and the generations behind us, the Z's and the Alphas, that's the kind of culture, if you will, inside of our churches, I believe, that also reflects the marketplace, that turns folks off, particularly from my
Yeah,
generation.
yeah, that's a good response, and I appreciate you sharing that. One things you shared about the filter, and I think it's real important that the filter is explained and clarified, because if the filter is not, if it's a faulty filter, then everything else is going to be
Mm,
faulty. And then, in my
exactly.
research, the baby boomers and those before us, my generation, we accepted things based on faith. It wasn't so much that it needed to be proven to us. We had a sincere belief and confidence that God is. We didn't try to explain God. We just accepted that God is who he is. But that's another conversation. But I thought it was good to hear from you, because of your involvement and because of the respect I have for you. And I'm
Thank
going to
you.
try to come back with another platform where we can just talk about faith
Sure.
generationally. Um, you wear a lot of hats, and you wear
Mhm.
them well, and I appreciate that about you. But you mentioned it, but describe your area of giftedness and service and ministry when it comes to church.
Mhm.
If I was talking to a preacher, I would ask the preacher, what type of preaching does he do? Is it narrative, topical, exegetical, expository, that kind of thing? When I talk to sisters in the church, I frame it differently. What would you say is your gift and your specialized area of service in the kingdom? And when I say kingdom, I'm going beyond the walls of the church building as well.
Mhm. I I believe I believe that I am called to be a change agent. And I say that, and that's not just in the church, but I make application to that based on the question. I am called to go into a space and assess it and make it better. And I think as that relates to ministry, it means that whatever wasn't there before and is needed, whatever wasn't there before, I am called to bring that. Whether that be through education, so, Bible classes, teaching ladies Bible class, which I'm now currently teaching for this month at Southside Church of Christ, where I'm a member, or whether I am serving in a marketing or PR ministry, which I have before, and my former congregation at Jackson Street Church of Christ in Nashville, launching the social media and the marketing pieces and all the things that helped grow the brand of Jackson Street, as Brother Crowder was coming into retirement and as Brother Chris Johnson was coming into the 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 position as minister, and that transition culturally. Um, I believe that's what I do best. Where there wasn't knowledge, I come bring it. Where there was no, energy or vision, I'm called to come bring that. Right. Where there was no plan or strategy, mapped out, I'm called to come in and bring execution and implementation. Right. Let's figure out how to get it done. Let's get it done. Let's measure it and make sure we got it done. Right. And if we didn't get it done the way we needed to get done, how do we assess it and improve it for the next time around? So I don't want to, just say I'm called to this ministry or that ministry. I believe that I'm called to come in and make impact and be a game changer for whatever is needed in that space. I'm grateful though that churches call me to speak in conferences and events and things of that nature. Last year, I got a chance to speak at a conference in Texas, and I was the only woman at the conference, and or the only woman on the agenda. And so I think that's a factor too, change agent, right? Like, I may not be the first woman on that was the only woman on the agenda, but I was the first woman who had been on that agenda, right? So I think that's a factor too. When you come into those spaces, knowing that your gift is to come in and be the change agent, you do have to, have you do have to accept that as a level of gifting, and there's a level of excellence that comes with that gifting. And so I believe that's where I'm supposed to be.
Yeah. Okay. Great response. I'll probably have to text and call you, get more information about that conference. But um, how do you prepare when you're asked to speak
Hmm.
in a church setting? So if I was talking to preachers, the question I ask them is, what's your sermon prep like? What are the steps that you go through um, to develop the lesson and then present the lesson? But for you as a woman and a sister who's called to speak to other ladies, and in churches of Christ, we have taken the position that women don't preach in a mixed audience. So when you're called to a ladies program, what's your preparation? What are the steps that you go through to prepare for that, or even your Bible class, that you're teaching? So your Bible class is coming up.
Yeah.
What's your preparation for that as well?
For that, um, well, my preparation for teaching or speaking is the same thing all around. I have the same approach to a corporate speaking, engagement with, say for instance, Starbucks. I've done I did a corporate engagement for Starbucks. I've done several corporate engagements, Microsoft, Amazon, etc. So I've done these corporate engagements, and same thing when I'm working for the church, working for God. I write a script. I am very intentional about whatever the point is, or whatever I've been asked. If it's Starbucks, they'll give me a topic and tell me to go. If it's a ladies program or a Bible class or a conference, they'll give me a topic and I go. And so typically what I do is I write a script. I think through what are the key points that I need to cover. I specifically, though, when it is preparation for Bible and church and conferences and things of that nature, I'm very intentional, of course, about praying first. How could I forget that? Very intentional about praying first. Sometimes I'll even fast for a day or two just to really wrap my brain around, or wrap, not even so much my brain, wrap my spirit around what, as I said earlier, what am I called to do in this space? What do I want, or what may perhaps God want me to give to these people that they have not experienced yet? Or what do they need more of? Or what is missing in this season? What shift may they be experiencing right now? What do I want to make sure that I'm hearing and I'm getting that download? How do I take that and make sure that it is something that people will walk away with and feel, yes, I heard from God today. Yes, I am empowered. Yes, I am enriched. Yes, I need to think differently. Yes, I need to live differently, whatever that is. So really start that first with intentional prayer, maybe a day of just fasting and thinking and taking notes and researching, right? And then I go from there. So I write a script. I write that script. I create slides around that script, graphics and things of that nature. I believe that visual components, of course, as a trained communicator, as a PR person, I believe that images are very important. And so I try to do a lot of storytelling around from the beginning and engage and do storytelling. use a lot of images in my presentations and things of that nature. I also believe in making sure that there are declarations and affirmations either before or at the end of at the beginning or at the end of any type of presentation that I'm giving, so that there's some engagement and people they kind of start off, affirming or declaring what the purpose or the point is for them to take away, and then at the end reaffirming and redeclaring and decreeing that as well. So I try to use those two things as bookends. um yeah, that's usually my process for the most part.
Well, that's good, and I appreciate you sharing that. Um, who are some church leaders or members who have made a significant impact in your life?
Oh, wow. I think I'd first have to start with my family. I'd first start with my uncle, who, as I said earlier, was the person who was a member of the church first in my family, and really evangelized our whole entire family and brought us to the Lord's church. But also his wife, of course, deciding to, and this is folks have different perspectives on this, but deciding to see the God in a man who was had been raised in a denomination, and deciding to see that and being willing to dwell with him, as the scripture says, being willing to be his wife, and cultivate in him the knowledge of Christ in a way that had not been cultivated before, and putting good people around him. So I tip my hat to both him and her first. Um, I also say, and again, I can't get away from my family, but my mom, she's just great. She's just been phenomenal, and I really appreciate her zeal and her love for the Lord, her heart for God's people. Um, my I would definitely say you, for sure. For sure. I have to say you made a significant impact for sure. In a number of ways. I would say you, I would say my minister from Jackson Street, brother Michael Crowder,
Yeah,
who
yeah.
he dwelled with us like young adults during that season. We were all kind of coming up at Jackson Street, and he dwelled with us. He taught us. He taught we did we, he taught us the minor prophets and the major prophets. He spent time with us doing having coming to gatherings that we'd have together. Like the young adults would be gathering together, hanging out, and here comes Brother Crowder, like or he would pray over us when we're having troubles on our job. He would pray with us, and be very intentional about that. He led us in a marriage series for like 3 months, preparing us for marriage. So he's significant as well. Brother Alvin Daniels has been an excellent mentor and just encourager for me. And who else? Those are the folks who come top of mind right now. I'm really grateful for my current church home, Southside, Brother Orlando Thomas. Really grateful for him and the folks there too. But those,
Yeah,
I would say, those are the
yeah,
majority. There's some folks I'm probably leaving out.
yeah, yeah,
But
yeah, yeah.
I have friends from my generation who were ministers and leaders in the church, and brothers who I consider to be good pals of mine, who have poured into me, and I've been able to pour into them. And they say, "I heard you doing that talk over there. Send me your notes. I want to see what you was talking about." So, like,
Well,
you
you
gonna be in
you
some
share some people with me, Dr. Hathaway in Little Rock. Uh,
yeah.
yeah, and she and she's so busy. I've been trying to get her to do what you're doing today, and we've just been so
Mhm.
busy. But I'm real honored that you included me in that list, and
Yes.
you bring a lot, and thank you for that. But you bring a lot to the table, of course, and yeah, and I know your mom is just super proud of you, and she was a great supporter of my ministry in Memphis, and so you and they're good people there. Got a couple more questions, and then we'll bring this to a close. What advice would you give to a young lady or anyone who is interested in ministry or just getting started in ministry? Because Ariel, you are a role model, a young millennial and successful. So whether you know it or not, you are a role model. You can't help but be one, and I share with our people all the time that young people, children look up to grown people just because of
Yes.
their presence. If you go to church regularly, you get used to seeing people there, and you
Mhm.
you you don't realize until later on how much influence or the impression you've made. But what advice would you give to someone if you noticed that they had an interest or they came to you and had an interest in getting involved in ministry or church work?
Mhm. Um, the first thing I think it's important to understand that they understand what ministry is. Um, and I think I was the way I was invested in growing up, and even just the life that I think I've, shaped as an adult. You kind of have to have, and I think the younger generation, we're kind of redefining what that could look like. I think it's an intergenerational approach to kind of redefine what ministry is and what it looks like for now and for the future. But I think understanding that ministry is, in many times, it doesn't necessarily have, there's no limit. There's no, like, it has to be a way of life. It's not just that we have this committee, we have this team, we're gonna help do this or that. It has to be, you have to have a heart for ministry. So I would first ask them or encourage them to really pray and ask God, you know, where is my heart? Do I have a heart for ministry, right? Because not everybody has a heart for ministry. It's true. Um, but do I have a heart to do this work? And really, I should, because of God, just simply because of who He is and what He's done, and for you in your life. And so that should encourage you and compel you to want to do work in the church or to want to live a life of ministry. And that's something that I have recently embraced, is that, Ariel, you have to live a life of ministry. That and because of the calling that you have, you cannot choose. You don't get to choose. That you don't just do ministry, you are ministry. And that's a different calling. But I would encourage them to really search their hearts, and recognize that in ministry is not a check the box thing. We went and fed the homeless, we're done. No, it's all the time. It's a way of life. It's a mindset. And so once you sign up for it, you want to be committed to it. You want to make time for it. You want to kind of move some things around in your schedule so you can prioritize it. Um, you want to give your best to God and your best to God's people. You want to move out of the way when somebody else may have a better approach than you. You want to be okay with not having to be the leader. You
Mm.
have to be selfless in most respects. You
Mm.
also have to have vision,
Yeah,
because, as I said earlier,
yeah.
sometimes we just do things the way we do things. But if there's a better way to do things, you have to, and you see that God has shown you a better way, you have to be, kind and diplomatic in how you bring it to everyone else and say, hey, y'all, have we thought about trying it this way? Have we thought about using this service or this platform or doing it this way? So I think that there's a certain approach that is important for women particularly to take, but not just women, men too. But I think there's a certain approach that when women want to be involved, because again, we know that, if women weren't in the church,
Yeah.
we wouldn't have
Right.
a lot of this stuff that wouldn't happen, right? So what does it mean for a young woman to say, you know what, I really feel led and called, my heart is compelled to work in this ministry, or to do this work, or to serve on this committee? I challenge, whenever I do certain talks at certain churches, like if it's a mixed audience, men and women, I mixed in that way, but if it's men and women, and I'm being asked to talk about, communication or marketing, or strategy for the church, and I go in and do these talks. um I often remind folks that, careful to call something a team.
Mm.
Be careful with that, because
Mm.
a team is great. You're gonna function as a team, but your purpose is ministry. So we want to say our media team, our marketing team. Whenever we think about something that's like a professional attribute, or something that
Yeah.
everybody else know how to do, and these folks, they specialize in this thing, we want to call those folks a team. No, those folks are doing ministry,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And so I think that's important too. I often have to remind, or kind of center that when I do certain kind of talks or workshops for churches, that, if it's the children's ministry and you're ministering to the children, you don't have a problem with calling the people who are the team, the children's ministry leaders, or the children's ministry. But then when it comes to the social media
Mm.
team, you only want
Mm.
to call them a team. You don't want to call them ministry. They're doing ministry. They're
Yeah.
posting, they're developing content, they're trying to
Yeah.
reach people, they're trying to broadcast stuff. That's ministry, right?
Yeah.
The deeper level is almost, if you do it a certain way, that's evangelism almost, right? And if you do it a certain way, you put a certain strategy on top of it. So I
Right.
think that's something important to consider as well.
Okay. Well, thank you. We need to do this again. There's a couple questions I did not get to, um, but we did touch on some things. I wanted to talk about the state of the church, and I think we did mention the state of the church in a couple of the conversations, and we'll circle back to that. Is there anything else you would like to say that you perhaps didn't get a chance to say? And you know, in just a minute or two, a couple minutes,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. As I said earlier in the last question that you asked me, ministry has become much of a lifestyle for me, and I'm really grateful that to be bringing back a series of episodes for my podcast, Affirmations of Excellence, so folks can be looking for that. I'm also very grateful that there are a series of Bible devotionals that will be coming out that I've written for the YouVersion Bible app. So there will be, at some point, you'll be able to go to the Bible app and find my devotionals there. So I'm really grateful for that. And so you'll see content there, and I'll ask everyone to support that and share those devotionals. And then working on a book, and some other things. So that's all. Just ask folks to be prayerful about that, not only for me, but all of us, who specifically women, who have a certain calling and have a calling to do the work of ministry in whatever capacity we God has led us to, and what that means for us, and what that means for us to be able to do it His way.
Right. Okay.
Right.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. And as we close out, we have enjoyed this podcast interview with Dr. Arerial Ellis. She's a Christian woman. She's gifted, and she is also a chair director at North Carolina Central, much involved in her church. And she's very gifted, and she has been very candid with us on today. These podcasts with sisters in Churches of Christ is going to be shown on Mondays at 7:30 p.m. It's going to be shown on the Somebody Must Come Preaching Facebook page. It will also be on podcasts. I think it's my podcast, and I need to get some help from Ariel about the podcast that she's doing as well. So share this with other people. And we've interviewed Mickey Taylor. We've interviewed Dr. Andrea Moore. We've interviewed Edith Dean Brown, who works in domestic abuse or domestic violence. We've got a couple more that we're planning to do next week. We've got Annette Wilson out of Jacksonville, Florida. We have someone who does marriage, a wife who and her husband does marriage seminars. So I'm looking forward, and we're going to show those during the month of March, but they will also be available archived on the Somebody Must Come Preaching Facebook page. So again, Preacher Conversations, Women of the Word. We appreciate what our sisters provide and bring to the table. May God bless you, and may God bless you. May he bless you real good.